last week. Let me just get things sort of set up on my laptop so I can monitor the chat. And let's see if we can get things in focus. Come on. There we go. It is Monday. We are working on Miles, and the particular Miles that we're working on today is the Q spread and the word for today's quest. So we've got Miles on a horse. Well, actually, I'm thinking more of a mule considering Miles's size, and he's off towards a castle. So let's get inking, huh? There we go. I'm working on Bristol board. This is actually, I think this is the smooth Bristol board. I finally, last week when I was away sick, I ended up prepping a bunch of stuff for the Noah's Archipelago coloring book that I'm working on Thursdays right now. And that meant that I finally assigned, haven't actually used it yet, but have assigned all of the recycled Bristol board that had like the rougher texture. So I'm into my stash now, which is, I think, pretty much all the smooth. So, yay! Let's see here. My usual thing about starting in the top left corner. Let's go move my lights so that we've got things a little bit brighter. There, that's better. And we're going to start top left and work down on inking this one. So let's get right to it. Um, so what happened, why I missed, well, I mean, I did this stream last week, but um, we're going to be working on evergreen trees, I think, for pretty much most of the night. But yeah, last Monday, I think my nose was already stuffy when I was streaming last Monday, working on the peace spread for Miles Maarav's Pursuit of Happiness. And then by Tuesday morning, I had, it wasn't a flu, but it was one of those head colds. So it's like, felt like I'd been sucker punched in the side of my face from the neck down. Well, then I had a sore throat, which was the real reason I why I skipped my later streams last week because I couldn't really talk. But it was one of those weird colds where I sort of felt sick, but not a whole lot. Anyways, I did work ahead on some other projects off camera, but so I've got a whole bunch of stuff prepped for the streams later this week. But right now it's Miles Maarav's Pursuit of Happiness, and he is going to be on a quest. So we got him running through the forest, which, like I said, we're going to be drawing a whole bunch of trees today. But hopefully people don't mind too much. We will have Miles when we get down to the bottom here, but yeah. So what I normally do, I'm using one of my thinner nibs. Um, Usually do all my thin line work. And hello, Brandon, how's it going? We'll be doing the thinner nib stuff at first, and then I'll come in with the fatter nib to add heavier shadows and some variation in the texture. You're doing good. Glad to hear that. Welcome to the show. Ian Edits. Hi, I'm new to the channel. Welcome. Glad you could join us. And hope you find this entertaining or whatever. So I am using, well, it's a dip pen and India ink, amazing drawing. Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's like stage 1 of my kind of messy trees. I mean, when I'm looking out my, window right now at my neighbor's house, and I do find, like, unless you wanna get, like, super, nitpicky with, every single leaf and whatnot, but even if you do that, then they don't tend to look real. You kinda almost it seems like a messy approach to kind of, squiggle back and forth, but that's actually kinda what they look like, so, yeah. But I have to leave. Hey, no worries, Brandon. Come on back whenever. I'll be here probably a couple hours tonight, and then, of course, I, stream, the rest of the week at 6:30 Pacific as well, so see you again soon. Um, so yeah, the kind of randomness I'm not too concerned with, like, I got some ink splotches there because I come back in and add some heavier shadow areas anyways, so it will end up being, a lot more balanced looking once everything's done, so I don't sweat the occasional ink spots. And, if I were to get an ink spot in an area where I really didn't want one, well, this is why we have Photoshop. So it's kind of one of the fun things of doing things by hand, anyways, is you have a certain level of unpredictability. Um, in this case, we've got the little bit of ink, and what it is I just ended up with a bit of a globule of ink underneath, and it decided to let go. But it actually let go in a pretty good spot, so, it works. But that's one of the fun, sometimes frustrating, but usually fun, aspects of working, um, by hand, right? Whereas digital, well, you just go undo, no big deal. So, um, we'll probably bring more of this down, but I do wanna have kind of some layered, so we'll have some shrubs. Here, I'm gonna try and vary my, strokes, because this baby is I don't know whether it'll be like a flowering bush or something, but it'll be kinda more of a poofier one as opposed to a needly one, if that makes sense. Um, so I'm just gonna kinda outline that shape, and now that I'm thinking of it, maybe when we get really close down, maybe what we've got is ferns, so they're gonna have a different texture again. So let's kinda go down here, and ferns kinda have a bit of a that kind of a vibe. Usually, I try and avoid working up, but, as long as I keep my hand here, I can pivot without smearing things, so it's all good. And we're gonna assume that the, pathway that Miles is on kinda starts around here, so I'm just gonna remind myself, I'll kind of do a little bit of dotting texture, which is what I tend to do in, like, gravelly kind of spaces. So that sort of sets that. The blue drawing, by the way, if anybody's, for those who are new here, or if you're haven't seen this done, it's kind of a traditional comics sort of thing. It's a non-photo blue pencil, and the idea is if you scan in black and white, it won't pick up on the light blue. There'd be some areas where it might, especially in grayscale, it definitely would, obviously, color it would. But especially once there's black around these darker blue, they tend to just get knocked right out. So, um, it's kind of the way you do things. Now, real old school. comics setting, what you would probably do is on the Bristol board, you'd have that, and then you would just like what they call the pencil. So you would use a literal pencil, HB pencil or whatever, and go over your lines, and then you would ink on something like vellum, which is really thick tracing paper, basically, so that there's definitely no blue there, but I don't know. I've done that long, long ago, but I haven't found it that highly alive with someone doing something cool artist here too. Why, thank you, Lord Hikari. I hope I said that right. Welcome to the show. Here I'm just kind of given the sense of I'm thinking kind of flowering shrubs. I mean, I guess rhododendrons are understory plants that do have big flowers, but uh, we're not necessarily trying to make it a rhodo bush. But give the sense where, yeah, maybe those are leaves, maybe they're flowers. It's going to be black and white, so can kind of leave that a little undefined. You did say it right, it means light in Japanese. Oh, awesome. For so often I've thought, oh, I should try and learn Japanese. And I thought, I have enough trouble with languages where I don't have to learn an alphabet. Although, yeah, I'm sure if I put enough time into it, I'd figure it out eventually. But Japanese is a little above my IQ range, I guess. It's a really cool language, though, and I've heard it spoken. So I have had friends who actually did learn enough Japanese to be, if not fluent, passable. Um, so we'll add some exposed tree trunks here. Well, shrub trunks. And add a few more ferns. Yeah, that's kind of actually looking more like a sucker off of that bush. So we'll go with that. Learn one method of drawing trees at W's, kind of like that. Yeah, it works, especially like this is a fair bit bigger. Not sure the exact size. I'm planning to shrink this down to probably something around like A5. So once you shrink it down, it gets small enough that if you try to draw it at size, you know, it's hard to draw it at size, but then also it means that you can be a little looser because when it gets shrunk down, it's going to look like, oh, wow, you really drew that super tight, right? Yeah. The pen has ideas about where I need shadows. We will go with that. So one problem with these kind of nibs is they do tend to have like a little surface tension, which is great so you don't have to constantly dip the pen, but it does mean it has a bit of a mind of its own at times. Yeah. Caught that one before it landed on the page. Don't know if that showed up in camera, but I just saw it sort of under the edge of the nib. I'm like, wait a minute, I see what it's trying to do. There's a hosta leaf, little hosta plant in this shady spot as well. We'll start working our way back up. Fill in the tree now that I've kind of established where the understory is. Kind of thicken up that line just to remind myself so I don't blend the conifer into the shrub too much. You can kind of get a sense from where that ink did drop, um, how that really deep shadow really helps. So that'll be the next stage. Started with pencil, moved on to pen and ink with pilot pens in college, got into digital. Yep. Yeah, have a comic that I've had been doing on iPad for a while. I just found um I kind of really like the by hand look, and also my posture is way better when I work with my hand, whereas I'm like completely hunched over, look like a golem if I'm in front of an iPad. Would love to get a bigger drawing tablet, so could do a little bit more digital work, but I kind of found like, well, for myself, I tend to do so much stuff just by hand, where it's like, okay, well, don't worry about it too much. I'm sure also some of it is the way I work digitally. There's probably a whole bunch of like shortcuts and ways to do things more time efficiently that I have not figured out. Whereas otherwise, I find it's like so much faster for me personally to just grab pen and ink and whatnot. Of course, on the back end, I'm going to have to, when this book is done, I'm going to be spending a couple weeks scanning and photoshopping. But that's a problem for future Pura, not for me, not for current Pura, right? I think that's the old Simpsons joke. Homer does something dumb, and he's like, "That's a problem for future Homer. I'm glad I'm not him." It's some of the fun stuff is, taking some hand drawn elements and collaging and sort of mixing the two. You get a really cool effect that way too. Stuff one more fern in here. And then start filling in the back. I think we'll have one fairly big deciduous tree here. Yeah, funny you mentioned pilot pens. That's been one of my favorite writing instruments for a couple decades now. It's high school. I find if I write with ballpoint pens, I get really nasty hand cramps, whereas those is like barely touch it, the pen to the paper, and you get your line, and it's just awesome. Still like to use the tablet because still, yeah, somewhat by hand. Like, yeah, like on the iPad, I have an Apple Pencil, so yeah, Undo is really nice. Like swapping between the bright, yep, with black, then erasing with white. Yeah, there's all, you know, there's so much that you can do. I guess it's like anything else, you get the arguments with painters, like, okay, acrylic versus oil versus watercolor. It's like, yeah, but all of them look kind of different. So, uh, you know, it's kind of what works for your particular flow and the look that you're going for, right? Don't know if any of the noise is picking up in the mic. Probably not because I'm wearing a lav mic, but we're having a bit of a windstorm here, so I'm like hearing random things going like. "Boom." Hopefully, we don't end up with a power outage. That would kind of suck, but I guess if the stream suddenly goes dead, then some branch hit a wire somewhere. But usually that's more of a January, February kind of issue here, so I think we'll be okay. Fill the now, just use up the ink that's in the pen, and then I'm gonna get moved to a fatter pen to add some shadows in there, so that I'm kind of moving across in chunks. Visual still awesome, yeah. Sorry, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's my kind of thing with well, the other problem I find with watercolor, and there's been times when I've done it more, but it's kind of backwards to how my brain works because I want to add things to get the picture, but with watercolor you kind of have to really like add around the things, because you got to protect the whites. So unless you're putting them in with masking fluid or something, right? It's just backwards to how my brain works. Um, because I also do a lot of acrylic painting, and there often you work darker out, whatever's furthest away and whatever's darkest up to closer and lightest, right? And you can always add highlights on top. So when I'm doing watercolors, I often it takes a couple weeks of practice, and I'm like, oh yeah, okay, so I have to actually like plan this in advance. um, I guess you could say it's the same thing here, right? I got to leave my whites and not paint them, um, but then I'm just starting with the darks, really. So um, definitely, like I've seen there. What's her name? Kelly Eddington on. She's on Instagram and whatnot, but she is a watercolorist who does like crazy hyper realistic portraits and big works too. And her stuff's amazing, and I'm always like, "Wow, you lady, you have guts." I would be terrified of, like, taking a, you know, 20-inch wide piece of paper and working on it for months with watercolor, right? But, she's got her system. Um, guess the way to do it with watercolor is you work fast so that you're not as concerned, if you screw something up, oh, well, the next one. Like, here in Canada, one of our most famous watercolorists, um, was Tony Only. My dad actually knew Tony, but Tony would do these, mountain landscapes. He'd kinda do 'em, like, one color, like, just shades of gray, but he would take his stuff out, and he would paint, 10 or 15 images of this one mountain in an afternoon. So and then he would pick the one he liked best, and that's what he would have, prints made of and whatnot. So that kind of, I guess, takes some of the risk out of it in that sense, because then it's like, well, if I screw this one up, I did 10 other paintings. So you get the multiple shots at it, right? Um, I mean, like with this, if I really make a mess up on it, I mean, it's for well, I was going to say graphic novel. This one actually isn't. It's going to be short story collection, and these are illustrations, like chapter headings and whatnot. But if I decide I didn't like that, I can fix that in Photoshop because it's not what I'm working on here is just it's the original art, but it's not what's actually going to be for for sale, right? Because I'm going to scan it and all that. And it's going in a book, so that gives me a little more wiggle room too. Um, but yeah, watercolor takes guts, is my opinion. Gouache is a little more forgiving. I mean, to a certain point, if you really mess up in gouache, it gets to a point where you can't save it. But at least because it's supposed to be opaque, you can go over, you can let it dry and layer, and to a certain extent, you've got you know you're golden, right? Whereas watercolor, for quick studies and stuff, that for the way my brain works, that's what I would kind of use it for. But then even at that point, it's like, or I could just, do quick studies with acrylic on paper or pencil crayons or markers or something and then go later. But it kind of comes down to what you're used to. I was painting mountains with clouds, so I love to paint. Yeah, loose sky. Yeah, yeah, skies are really fun to do in watercolor. Uh, yeah, I think it's been. I did take a gouache class a couple years ago, one summer. But like for watercolors, I'd say it's probably been oh, maybe 10 years almost since I really was putting a lot of time into them. And then they weren't really representational. Like there were representational elements, but I was kind of trying to do, I don't know, some kind of highfalutin symbolism or whatever. so so it didn't matter as much if I was making things look accurate, you know what I mean? But at the same time, I was doing a lot of kind of probably sounds pretentious to say impressionistic, but non-realistic, but also non-abstract um, mountain nature scenes, that sort of stuff. So it's one of those things where every so often I'll be like, I really should break out the watercolors and like do some like plein air type of sketches and whatnot, and then I just never get around to it. Each medium, yeah, own style one. Of course, some of the fun too is when you have a certain mastery of the medium, then deciding to try and make it do things it doesn't want to do, or well, maybe not want to do, but that are harder to do with that medium. Like what I said with that Kelly lady, and her like super realistic watercolor portraits. Like, if you didn't know they were watercolor, you'd assume it was acrylic or oil. Um, Obviously, talking about not seeing them in person, but seeing them on Instagram. Although she does have, it's almost like a glow to them, which I think is probably pretty hard to accomplish in certainly in acrylics. You might be able to kind of get it with glazing and oil. So that I think that's where the watercolor really shines. Because it's got that translucency, right? But that her stuff almost looks backlit. But I think I'm not sure exactly how old she is, but I think she's in her 50s or something, and she's been painting watercolors, since high school. So she knows what she's doing. I do not with watercolors. All right. So that added a little more density into the shrubbery here. I'm going to do this next tree, and then I think it's going to be time to start working on Myles himself. But he'll be kind of the last thing on this page. move my shot glass full of ink off to the side because otherwise my hand will back of my hand will certainly find it. Old crappy old toothbrush works great for that. Had to one of the paintings I was doing back when I was doing some more watercolors is I was trying to get a snow effect. I used actually white gouache, not watercolor, but on top of a watercolor and just going like my thumb on the bristles, and it worked great. Uh, I would occasionally use in Procreate some of the spray paint splatter brushes for like backgrounds in comic scenes or whatever if I wanted them to look a little more grimy. I did find they often I guess I needed to screw with the, brush settings more, but I did find they tended to start kinda look a little too uniform. But if I did multiple layers and then kind of, like, messed with the, blending mode and whatnot, sometimes I could kinda get it the way I wanted, but yeah. This is a much fatter I don't know if it's a fir tree or whatever kind of tree it wants to be, but, let's make a note that we would like another one of these over there, so I don't just draw right over it. Yeah, I've definitely seen some, postings of work that I was pretty shocked to find out was digital. I was like, "Oh, wow." You know way more about, your settings and using the material mediums in, like, Procreate than I do, 'cause I could never get anything to look like that, but yeah. Mind you, there are also a lot of brushes in Procreate I never really mucked around with, so, that would be my own fault. So I knew somebody um, who I don't think she actually did it in digital art. I think it was actually a lot of it hand drawn, but then she would take photos of her handwork and she imported them all into Procreate, and she actually used Procreate to do her entire book layout, which I didn't even know you could do. I guess it would be one of what do they call it, Page Assist or something, but I always thought you had to use InDesign for that sort of thing, but, she apparently somehow put her book together in, her I could think it was like a graphic memoir type of thing, and she did the entire thing in Procreate, which just blew my mind. Like, "Okay, this software has a lot more capability than I bothered to learn." Let's think that there might be some really big ferns stuck back here too. It'd be kind of fun to have a little bit of a different texture. That's very similar to the conifer texture, but whatever. And here we are going to have a different shrub right below. I think this, I'm just going to put a black background and who knows what's going on back there. He's kind of going through a dark forest, although one with a manicured path. And that will, of course, spill over onto the next page, which we'll get there when we get there. Now, Myles here, the letter for this, because I'm going through um, alphabetically a spread for each letter. This is Q and Quest. The next page will have a castle, but this is starting to suspiciously look like, the kind of woodland gardens that certain castles have that are completely not actually natural. Uh, so perhaps Myles is being a little lazy in the quest department, but that's kind of his business, I guess. Try and give a little bit. Here we kind of want it when that nib is running out of ink, but still want to give a little bit of shadow into these puffy little suspiciously perfect looking bits of foliage. Usually, when I'm working on illustrations for short stories I've written and whatnot, usually the story comes first and then I illustrate. In this book project, I'm actually doing the opposite. So, kind of going through picking things to draw, and then the idea is I'll write the stories afterwards. So, it's just kind of taking the character, not so much the character, but some of the his activities and directions I wouldn't necessarily have thought of. Like the one I drew last week, where one of the pages he's dressed up and practicing for a polka band. I didn't know until I drew it that he played in a polka band, but it just seemed that, yeah, yeah, he does. That's right. So now I'll have to go write a story about it, but kind of fun to figure out which direction you usually work in and then deliberately try and do the opposite and see what happens sometimes. Yeah, yeah, should I do him? Yeah, I'll do him and then I'll fill in this section and do his, well, horse, mule, whatever. So Miles is a mouse dude. Well, he's half mouse, half rat. He's in a fictional universe where everybody's kind of one or the other, except for Miles, who's both. Hence the big round ears and, well, not looking super round from this angle, but they are round from the front. And we will be drawing his whiskers in momentarily. Another thing about Myles is that he is a bit of a hobbyist Elvis impersonator. That was another thing I discovered earlier on in working with on this book, which I hadn't really thought of before. But when it came to the E section, I just couldn't um, shake the feeling that Myles should be dressed up as Elvis. So it's actually come up a few times now. Um, E, of course, but also in the case spread, he was dressed up as the king, and he was fighting a knight on a castle keep, which he's going to be approaching a castle in this spread, so perhaps he's going back for revenge if the knight won. Or perhaps he took the knight's castle and now he's going to claim it. Don't know yet. Haven't written the story yet. Anyways, there's Miles' little tail. Disappearing underneath his cape. quite a while ago when I was uh, first starting to draw Myles dressed up as Elvis. I did a whole rabbit hole on Elvis's jumpsuits, so I think this is kind of vaguely like one of the ones I've seen pictures of where it kind of had decoration down the well, they all had decorations down the arm, but different types. Give him some diamonds going down that way. And then one of those giant belts with the different huge round decorations. And of course, you can't go on a quest if you don't have a sword, right? So give the hint of some sort of a diamond decoration on the back of Miles's Elvis jumpsuit. I'll have to watch out when I'm writing. I'm not because of how some of the rights of publicity work. Um, Now, with living celebrities, of course, it's pretty clear cut that they have the rights of publicity and whatnot. Dead celebrities, it really depends on jurisdiction. But I think Tennessee, where Elvis's estate is based, have some of the toughest rules and the longest lasting protections after death. Um, I have heard, I don't know if this is still true, but supposedly when Tarantino did True Romance, um, that character Clarence being a huge Elvis fan, they had that. I want to say it was Val Kilmer, basically playing the ghost of Elvis, but because and dressed in a way that you would immediately go, "Oh yeah, that's supposed to be Elvis." But because of how um, things were with the rights of publicity and um, lawsuit threats and whatnot from Elvis's estate. I think in the script, what it actually says is mentor for his role, even though you take one look at him and go, Didn't really see his face, but he's wearing a gold lame suit and he's got those gold kind of sunglasses that Elvis wore. It was pretty obvious who it was, but they couldn't supposedly, again, this is what I heard. Supposedly they couldn't actually say that it was the ghost of Elvis, even though it was like the impersonation and the voice and all that. It was kind of funny. So point is, when I do write the stories, I don't know if we'll actually have mention of Elvis or of Myles being an Elvis impersonator, or whether it would just, you know, be very clear that that's who it's supposed to be. Um, I'm just going to make this a darker fabric so I have his bell bottom godette there. Uh, Something I'll have to look into for sure, anyways. A fun fact, I don't, again, with deceased celebrities like Elvis, I think it depends on your jurisdiction, because a lot of jurisdictions, rights of publicity end as soon as you die, and some it goes like, 10 or 20 years after death or whatever. But certainly with living celebrities, impersonators are, they actually have to get permission and often pay licensing fees and whatnot, which is every so often I see, you know, somebody's making a living as an impersonator, and then fans of that artist are like, yeah, just being pissed off at the guy or whatever. And you realize, oh, well, if the person he's impersonating is alive, he probably had to have, at some point would have had to get permission or else face a lawsuit. So, chill. Uh, I think at some point it used to be the case for certainly if you're in like Tennessee or whatnot, I think you do still have to have permission, have like a licensing fee from Elvis's estate or whatnot. I don't think that's the case in other places like Canada, but who knows? Random little factoid. I've had friends who played in tribute bands and known a couple people who did the impersonator tribute act thing. So comes up occasionally in comics and stuff that I do. But anyways, that's kind of neither here nor there. I have to switch nibs because this one is starting to act like it's a little gunked up. I'm going to assume that his pony or mule or whatever, I think the reference photo I used was a mule. There's some variations in coloring, so this makes it a little more interesting to look at and draw. Make it look like Myles has a fern growing out of his third eye. This mule looks like it's got a little llama in its DNA. Who knows what goes on in these cartoon worlds? We will kind of wrap up this page with some like dirt kind of dots to indicate little pebbles and whatnot. Then I'm going to switch to the fatter nib and darken up the path and add some shadows under there. And then we get to move on to the next part. All right. Hi, Bubble. How's it going? Just in time to see the end of the first page and the start of the second. Yeah, I had definitely gotten when I was shaking some of the excess ink out of the pen back into my little shot glass. Some had actually splattered up there, but that's not a big deal because we can just hide that. I can set that aside because now I've got my markers basically for where we're going with the second page. Actually, I'll probably keep this down here a little while longer just so I can compare. Not completely ready to stick this first page out of the way for now. Now, because this is going to be a full bleed spread, what it'll probably actually be would be kind of like that by the time the trim and the cut goes. But because it's going to be in the gutter of the book, honestly, unless you like y- almost break the spine of your book to see it, you're not really going to see how it lines up. So we don't have to be super, super exact. And you want to be close, but you don't have to be too neurotic about it by any means. One of these, one of my favorite steps is these little, the way we did birds in like kindergarten, the kind of V, wide, floppy V birds. Always kind of fun to add in for a little extra touch. Debated whether I should add some clouds in the sky, but I think this is busy enough without that, so we won't bother. So we got another conifer here. I think I'm gonna just make a little note for the one here, because some conifers, uh, they go up and some they droop down. These, I'm now on my third one that droops down, so I think I'm gonna try and remember and indicate off. I think it's kind of out of focus right now, but I think we should have at least one conifer that goes up as well. Maybe we can get this one to kind of go up a little bit as well. Yeah, and that gives it a little more variety. After all, unless you're on like what's basically a plantation, and the forestry companies replant, but they replant with all the same species. usually aren't gonna have everything, be the same. I was seeing something the other day, well, actually, I guess it was a couple weeks ago now, but, there's some, advocates for, the giant sequoias and regrowth of that in areas that had burned a few years ago, or a few years before this YouTube thing was filmed, but where there had been, an area of giant sequoias, um, that had been caught up in a huge, wildfire in California, and the guy was commenting there was one area they went in, areas where um the Park Service had, replanted. They put in, 1,000 seedlings of giant sequoias into, a fairly like a hectare, fairly small area, and they wouldn't plant anything else, but if and there were a couple areas they didn't get around to planting where it was, like, too steep or whatever, and the areas they didn't plant actually, after a couple years, had better survival of sequoia, um, seedlings, and part of it was because other things were allowed to come up first, and then those sheltered the sequoia seedlings and whatnot, but anyways, the guy had mentioned, when you go to an area of mature sequoia forest, you know, you probably only have 4 giant sequoias per acre, and there'd be other trees in the midst of them, right? So, um, he was commenting that trying to do, like, the monoculture replanting actually does them a disservice, versus the areas where they just naturally reseed themselves. They'll have a lot more seedlings, and, of course, most of them are gonna die because by the time they get to be giant, giant sequoias, well, you're at that, uh, point where there might be only a handful per acre. So, anyways, point is that's why I'm gonna try and make this and these 2, conifers look a little bit different because that's more natural. One of the other things that's kinda interesting to look into is when they talk about how in medieval times, the coppicing that was done on woodlands, actually, you would have trees that would live a lot longer and have more variety because, one guy would be in charge of keeping track of what they planted or the last time they coppiced, how often can you coppice, and when I say coppice, I mean, like, cutting it down, but leaving the stump and whatnot there, so, um, you may cut it, like, a couple feet off the ground, and then it sends up new shoots or branches off of that. Some places you would actually do, I think they call it pollard, where you cut it at, like, 8 feet off the ground, and then it sends up new trunks out of there, but, anyways, it was an interesting video comparing medieval forestry management and how they were actually able to get more wood from denser forests without actually killing the trees. Um, so yeah. Anyways, there's some videos on that if you're interested. Do a search for medieval coppicing forestry. Um, it'd be kind of interesting. This one's going to be a little more narrow as opposed to constantly going out. It kind of goes out and then it goes straight down. And that's because I want to show the path is going around. Path's actually coming out this way, but we get some forced perspective because obviously if it's that wide there and wide enough for him and his horse here, obviously we've got a fair bit of distance. drawing the branches on this one as if they were mini trees in of themselves because, well, I mean, most of this stuff is fractal, right? So so far we've used a skinny nib and a fat nib. I think on this page we're going to have some more medium nib. But that first page I think took an hour and 15 minutes or so. I don't think this one's going to take as long, but famous last words. Many a time it's been like, oh, this page is not going to take nearly as long. And then it's like 2 hours later. And since we're up here and have the skinny nib, let's do the little castle now. I have one big evergreen that's very kind of black back here, but this one's supposed to be quite far away. Probably wouldn't actually have those cantilevered out that far, but you know, it's the cartoon world. So we're just going to put some indications of breaks, not actually try and draw them all there. So yeah. I think I'm going to show that there is a drawbridge here and it is pulled up. I wouldn't actually reach over there, but we'll kind of make it a little further. But we definitely want to get the sense that there is a ravine or something here. Oh my god, I just realized I drew the whole castle. Didn't drag it over. I am so sorry. There. My bad. I'm usually, if I'm on that page, I'm thinking it is in focus. So, anyways, the castle magically appeared. Oh. I'm gonna blame that on the fact that I'm getting over a cold. That sounds like a good excuse. And some big rocks over here. And now let's switch pins and add some heavier shadow into what we've got already. I don't know if that engine revving picks up in my mic. If it does, it's my neighbor. I think he's having car issues trying to get something going. So, and of course, now that I mention it, it probably doesn't pick up at all, but I can hear it loud and clear. Hello, Arthur. It's realistic drawing. How's it going? Nice big fat evergreen here. Kind of fun to get scratching into with the thicker nibs. Okay, now kind of want to add a little bit, kind of envisioning a bit of like, not a lawn, but like a bit of a meadow there. So let's kind of rough in some of the shadows on this tree, which is going to be sitting right about there. After all, I often will start a tree with the smaller nib, but there's nothing that says you can't start with the fatter one and then go over for the really teeny tiny details. And also with this nib, as it's running out of ink, it kind of breaks up, so you get a bit of that um, shadowy, soft, feathery kind of as well. And then we're kind of going to repeat this kind of a tree right about here as well. But that definitely, I'm going to start with the smaller nibs. So and before I do that, I'm going to put in a little bit of grassy texture, which actually I might do that. Let's do that with the glass pen. Let's do that with the brand new glass pen I haven't used on stream yet. See how this one draws compared to the old one I've got. Every so often I'll add like a little darker, like there's a little bush creeping out into the meadow. A little seedling or something. That's with that, so we're not blocking the light. That would be helpful, wouldn't it? Missed 4 shows because I had a cold and couldn't talk. And then of course half of my streams I don't talk anyways. But feels almost like I've completely forgotten a lot of things about streaming. Make sure what you're drawing is on camera. Okay, why is that? Fine. One thing I find with these glass pens is they're fun, but I do find like sometimes you like turn them a tiny bit and it goes from that kind of fine line to like a really messy line, like a really broken one. Could just be that I have bad pen technique, but okay, see there, that's drawing better again. That's got a big old clump of ink, but okay, that's for whatever reason, that one's been a pain. So we will go to the old ink or the old glass pen. I think making these is not exactly an exact science, right? And this is also one I've had for a few months. See, that's drawing beautifully. But if I turned it a quarter of a turn, it probably wouldn't anymore. Yeah, well, that's okay. Now, because I called it out, now it's going to work. Anyways, that kind of filled in the area I wanted filled in. And a couple more little squiggles for possible baby trees. There. And before we get any further down to the bottom of the page, let's add some detail into this tree. I'll go over this again with the fatter nib to add in more deeper shadows. But we'll at a hint of another conifer that's right in front of us. Kind of veering off here. And let's have some ferns kind of coming in around here as well. Like I kind of said much earlier in the show, working on the first page, I want it to be a little suspicious as to whether this is a natural forest or whether this is like landscaped. Yeah. Is Miles on a real quest or is he just, pretending? A few hostas over on this side as well. Kind of look like giant flowers, but you know. And why don't we just put one, use some more conifer sort of texture down here. My phone thinks I should have finished drawing this by now. I still got a little while, probably 10 minutes. So, but I think I probably am going to eh, I'll add a few more hostas. So now let's move to the bigger nib again. I'm just gonna make the forest floor, or forest, could be like a woodland garden, kind of dark. Ah. And the laptop just decided to go to sleep. There we go. Okay. Obviously, I hadn't hit anything on the keyboard in too long. So, and aside from monitoring the chat when there are chats, I kind of find helps to look up and see what it's looking like in the camera, and that kind of tells me if there's areas that maybe need a little more attention, a little more shadow, or not. A little bit more definition up there. Now, I think we is done. Let me have a look at both of them together, which I'm going to be able to see, but won't really show in the camera. Stand up. Yeah, I think we are doing. Actually, I'm going to give just a little bit of thickening with a medium nib to the front edge of. It's not much, but it does bring the mule out just that little bit. So let's review. I think like I said, we can see the middle there, but so the first page, which took about an hour and 15, is the left-hand page of the spread. So this is for my I was calling a graphic novel. It's actually going to end up being a book of short stories, and each short story has at least a couple illustrations. So the spreads I've been doing would be maybe like chapter headings or whatever, or section headers. So, and it goes alphabetically because the project was originally inspired by a YouTuber named Truthless and his alphabet superset challenge. So this is the letter Q for quest. The main character is Myles Maarav here, my little half mouse, half rat dude from my Ricky B, the Rock and Roll Rat universe. He's Ricky's girlfriend's cousin. Um, so, anyways, for Quest, I have him approaching a castle. So, this was the first page. He's in a forest in theory. The more you look at it, the more you start to think he's in a manicured forest garden um, that belongs to this castle. But I haven't written a short story yet, so we don't know yet. But that's kind of what he's looking like. I'm gonna actually. Another thing just popped out at me. If I can find the right nib, gonna give a little bit of a shadow underneath that saddlebag, so it also has a little bit of depth. Um, yeah, right. Yeah, we kind of already have that and that. I think that's just enough. Yeah. So I am always with this stuff. If I see in 3 days, like, oh, I need a little more darkness wherever, then I'll add it, right? But anyways, so we've got Miles. He's riding a mule. Could be well, originally I was like, will it be a horse? Will it be a donkey? I'm like, I don't know. Kind of based it off of pictures of mules with the ears and whatnot. So, and the ears kind of blend into the foliage a little bit, but that's kind of fun. Anyway, so he's on this path that where the plants look suspiciously like that kind of looks like cloud pruning, I think is what they call it in Japan, where it's kind of like bonsai style, but big. Um, so he's there, and then where he is headed, of course, that's where it meets up in the middle because this is a spread. And that there is the second page with more of the forest garden type of mixed border, who knows? And the castle in the background with the drawbridge up. So that is what we did today. Um, Pretty happy with it. There's certainly been a couple of these Miles drawings where afterwards I'm like, "Oh, I have to redraw it. I'm not thrilled." But yeah, I'm happy with this one for sure. And of course, Miles is dressed up as Elvis, which kind of harkens back to a couple earlier illustrations in the book. So, well, there you have it. Now, last week, at the end of the Monday Miles stream, I was like, "Oh yeah, and I'll see you tomorrow." Blah blah blah. And then my sinus cold kicked in, and talking made it feel like I had razor blades in my throat and all this stuff. So I wasn't able to stream the rest of the week. But I'm over that now. So we will be here tomorrow, 6:30 Pacific. And tomorrow, Tuesday, I am working on my calendar project. I did while I was sick, I went ahead, I did one of the pages, although I'll end up redoing it. But we will be, which actually reminds me, I got to do the underdrawings for the couple that I'm planning to do. But anyways, we will go ahead and we will be working on a couple pages, illustrations for the 2027 Noah's Archipelago calendar that I want to put out. And then Wednesday, we'll be inking a couple pages from Zommel the Destroyer, a reboot that Zommel the Destroyer was a comic I did from 20, or not, well, from 2006 to 2009, and then in 2013 I was going to reboot it. I drew this 8-page comic and then I set it aside, and that's what we're inking now because I decided I'm going to publish an omnibus of those comics, and this will be kind of the coda. And then what ended up happening was I actually turned Zomo into a podcast, so I have tons of scripts. Those will become an illustrated book down the road. But anyway, so Wednesday we'll be working on Zomo. Thursday we are working on the Noah's Archipelago coloring book, and then Friday we are working on Miles's cousin's boyfriend's book, Ricky B Goes to Sea. So, I'll take one more look at today's work for Miles. Here. And yeah, that's going to be it for tonight. So, I hope you have enjoyed the drawing tonight, the stream tonight, and we will see you again real soon. Take care. Bye for now.